guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, hello, hi, I'm Jyotsna and this is a booktube channel where I talk about books and I recommend books and I talk about a lot of the books I read basically, okay? And if you're here, this video is a recommendations video which I kind of don't do very often, and today being the World Book Day, I decided that I have to continue this tradition. So last year as well, I made a video for World Book Day. It's down in the description box below. You can check it out because it has a different set of recommendations. But in this video, we are going to look at 23 prompts that I have collected from all over the internet, and I'm going to give you recommendations based on those. And again, those prompts are there in the description box below. And of course, this is being done solely because it's World Book Day today, and wishing you a happy World Book Day. So anytime you want to navigate through the prompts, it's there in the description box below. All of them have been listed, and also you may have some background noise here because there are kids playing right outside my window, but let's just ignore them and get into the video. Okay, so the first prompt is a book in translation, and for me, one of my favorite books that I've read recently, and it's a translated book, is The Mother of 1084 by Mahashweta Devi, translated from Bengali to English. And it's basically a read which talks about a mother who's lost her son due to the system, and it talks about how other people in the family are just not ready to acknowledge it because the son was a black sheep, he was more like an outcast, and it's just that the mother is still dealing with this grief. The mother still feels bad about the unlawful death of the son, right? And it's her story. It's a pretty meditative read. It's something that's pretty short as well. You can finish it in one sitting, and it's a very hard-hitting book for sure. Okay, the next prompt is a title that starts with J, and I selected this because J, Jyotsna J, you get my point. And I have the perfect book for this that I've been waiting to recommend to a lot of people, and I've recommended in the past if you're a regular viewer of my videos, and that is Jasmine Days by Benjamin, which I absolutely loved a lot. Now again, this is a book about the system, the faults in the system, and it's set in an unnamed Gulf country, and it talks about a Pakistani immigrant. Now basically this book is written in the form of a memoir, and it's a fictional memoir actually, but the elements of the book are pretty interesting, and these books and these elements are seen in the society even today, irrespective of whichever country you belong to. The next prompt is of course one of the prompts that I had to just sneak in to this list, okay? And if you again are a continuous viewer, a frequent viewer of this channel, then you know how much I love non-fiction, especially when it comes to Indian non-fiction. So the next prompt is a political non-fiction recommendation from India, and for me this has to be the one that I read recently, and that is The Silent Coup by Josie Joseph. It again talks about the system. There's a lot of things about the system going on here, literally, and it talks about the Indian security establishment and how they really don't serve any value to the nation because they're somewhat muddled with politics and corruption. It's a pretty eye-opening read. It has a lot of experience that Josie Joseph has brought in with his brave journalism, and to be honest, even this is being published in today's India is a surprise. So it's a highly underrated book. It is an underdog, and I highly recommend that you read it, especially if you're Indian, to understand where we are and why we are here with a lot of things, including terrorism, nationalism and things like that. So yeah, and of course the fourth prompt, yes, the fourth prompt has to be a historical non-fiction from India, and for this again I have to recommend a Manu S. Pillai book, that is The Ivory Throne. The Ivory Throne is basically the story of the House of Travancore, and it kind of starts from real way back in the 1600s, and there's an introduction, and then it talks about how the system or the matrilineal system of the House of Travancore is, and then it narrows down on Rani Setu Lakshmi Bai, who was one of the queens of the house, and she was like this amazing, strong member of the royal family. It's a very interesting book, well written, Typical Manus Pillai. It took him 6 years to research this book, and this book is his baby basically. So I highly recommend it for sure. You will love it. If you're a fan of history, if you've loved history in school, this is the book that you have to read. Okay, and going to the sixth prompt, and that is a non-fiction book that is set outside of India, right? And because we are talking about non-fiction and I love non-fiction, one non-fiction book that I have to recommend that is set outside of India is Nothing to Envy by Barbara Demick. Now the thing is that Barbara Demick is chef's kiss. Like, she's one of my favorite authors of all time. She's one of my favorite non-fiction authors of all time, and she basically writes a lot of I would say political non-fiction. I love both her books, of course, but the one that I want to mention for this prompt is Nothing to Envy, of course, as you can see, which talks about the lives of the people in North Korea. It kind of takes up a storytelling format when it comes to non-fiction, and it tells you how she has interacted with some North Koreans who actually ran away from North Korea and what their journey was to South Korea. It talks about their childhood and how things were in North Korea once upon a time, and how after the collapse of the Soviet Union, everything went literally down. Okay, amazing book, great read. It was a full 5 from my side. I highly recommend it. Okay, the next recommendation is for the prompt, a book set in a Mediterranean country. And for this, the moment I saw this prompt somewhere online, it suddenly sparked like in my brain that I recently read The Island of Missing Trees by Elif Shafak. Now, this is my first Elif Shafak and I absolutely loved it. Okay, it's kind of set in Cyprus, and it mainly talks about Cyprus and the history of Cyprus in general, and it also keeps switching to modern day London, where we have a daughter who's waiting for answers about their about her parents, and her parents are, by the way, Greek and Turkish. Okay, it's a very interesting book. It talks about the history of Cyprus, the war that happened in Cyprus, which I had zero idea about, by the way. And this is one of those books that you have to read that's set in a Mediterranean country. And the reason I selected this is because from what I understand, Cyprus is kind of close to the Mediterranean region, right? And there is a lot of Greek and Turkish influence on the island, and I think this fits the bill perfectly. So the next prompt is a literary fiction book that you recommend. And yeah, I mean, you know me, I read a lot of literary and contemporary fiction, and there are a lot of times these lines get blurred, and there are a lot of books that fit into this category, but there are better books that fit into other categories that I'll be discussing about. So for this particular prompt, I highly recommend Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller. If you're someone who's a fan of literary fiction and also somewhat of contemporary fiction, then this is the book to read. This was an absolute surprise for me when I read it last year for the Women's Prize in Fiction 2021, of course. If you do not know me, just FYI, I read the Women's Prize shortlist every year, and this year as well I'm planning to do that. No pressure though. But Unsettled Ground is about these twins, fraternal twins who kind of live in the brink of poverty in rural England, and it kind of tells you their story about struggling through it, and by the way, they stay with their mother as well, right? So how they try to put food on the table. If you're a fan of literary fiction, you will absolutely love it. But if you're just getting into literary fiction, I may not recommend this book. There are other books in the list that you can try out, and I would say that you can select any book in this list because most of them are contemporary or literary fiction. Okay, so yeah, that's that. And that being said, the next prompt is a book that is a slow burn. Okay, it basically is slow. It kind of it burns within you in a slow manner. It's like a flame that keeps burning, but it's like slow. You get my point? And for this, I have to recommend Half the Night is Gone by Amitabh Bakshi. And I am so disappointed that this book is not spoken about often on BookTube. I don't know why, don't ask me why, but especially Indian BookTube needs to read this book. It's a beautiful book about generational trauma, father-son relationship, the loss of a son, the story of, how fathers treat their sons, basically, how fathers treat their children. And I think it's a slow burn, because when you're getting into the book, you do not know what you're getting into, and slowly and steadily, when you realize what you're getting into, you just enjoy each page of it. This is again a meditative read, beautifully written book. Of course, I have to highly recommend it. The next book that I want to recommend, and the prompt is an own voices book, and for me this has to be a non-fiction book because it's an own voices book. It is Coming Out as Dalit by Yashika Dutt. This is Yashika Dutt's debut novel, which won the Yuva Sahitya Puraskar Award in 2020, and it is a book that talks about what it is to be a Dalit in modern India. Now, we read this as a part of my group read on Instagram, and if you do not know, I have a group read which is called On Reading Nonfiction, where we typically read nonfiction books from India and all over the world on a monthly basis, monthly-ish basis. And if you want to be a part of it, you can DM me on Instagram. But that being said, it's a brilliant book. It talks about a lot of aspects that we need to understand about being a Dalit in modern India, and how she came in terms with her identity, right? It is a very interesting take which talks about like information about the Dalit community as of today, and also her memoir and how she feels as a Dalit woman. Okay, so amazing book, highly recommend it, and it is totally an own voices read. That being said, the next book is a book featuring an ocean voyage. Okay, and for me, like there are like couple of books come to my mind, but this is a book that I've recommended before on this channel. For me, it has to be Sea of Poppies by Amitav Ghosh, which talks about multitude of characters, multitude of nationalities as well, surprisingly, who kind of are like put on a boat and sent to Mauritius. And it's a historical fiction book which is set in British India, and it talks like, so this is just when the East India Company was getting into India, and there were a lot of, I would say, the sort of opium trade that was going on, a lot of cash crops were being grown. And it's during this time that one woman finds herself in trouble, another woman finds herself, stuck at a place. It's brilliant. Okay, and especially there's a voyage and there's a ship, and they're on the ship, and yeah, it's an amazing read. I highly recommend it. And if you never read Amitav Ghosh, this is what you read first. So just FYI on that one as well. Okay, and the next the next prompt is a debut novel that I recommend, and a debut novel that I recommend, and I highly recommend it because I read this last year, and I think many of you must have read this as well by now. It actually lives up to the hype, and that is Madeline Miller's The Song of Achilles. I really love this book a lot, and it was surprising for me that this was her debut novel. Madeline Miller actually studied Greek mythology in college, and it took her 10 years to finish this book. Okay, so now you can understand why this is brilliant, why it also won the Women's Prize in Fiction in one of the years. I think this was way back, but again, beautiful book. Read it, it's worth the hype. And it's a beautiful debut novel as well, and when you read the book, you will never feel like this is a debut novel. It's just a very beautiful novel. Okay, and that being said, the next prompt is, well, I have all my prompts here, so I'm just reading out from this particular sheet. The next prompt is a book with more than 500 pages that you recommend, and you know what's going to come for this prompt. If you know me, A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. And if you're still contemplating whether you should read this book or not, please read it, please jump into it. Of course, it will take like 2 to 3 months to actually get through the book, because there are 1500 pages in this Indian fictional read, but let me tell you, it's worth the read. Again, if you're a fan of literary fiction, if you're a fan of contemporary fiction, this is your jam. Okay, don't let the length intimidate you. It's not only a love story, it's not only about finding a suitable boy, but it's also about the politics in the 1950s, when India was just like out of the British rule. Beautiful book, highly recommended. Chef's kiss. Don't get intimidated by the number of pages. The next prompt is a current events book, and this prompt actually didn't specify which country should it be from, so I left it in the open. For me, like the current events book that I think with respect to India, because I always think with respect to India, is this one. This is India's China Challenge by Anand Krishnan. Now, I did conveniently read this book recently, and that's why this is there in the list. But it is like it fits the bill with respect to current events, considering the border tensions with China. And this book just released in 2020 during the pandemic, when the border tensions were at an all-time high, right? It kind of talks about India and China, especially Chinese history, Maoism, economy, and how China had this economic boom. It gives you like a good background of a lot of historical things, but it does not explain like basic things like the Great Leap Forward or, the Cultural Revolution, because you need to Google those terms. But then this book does do a good job of summarizing a lot of aspects about the Indo-Chinese relationships. It's for sure a current affairs book, especially when it comes to the last part, which is called Portraits, which talks about Chinese individuals who have like a connection with India. And it's very nice to read this book. I do recommend it. But again, you need to have a good background on Maoism in order to get into the book and enjoy it thoroughly. Okay? And that being said, the next prompt is a BIPOC book recommendation, right? So basically, when it comes to like a BIPOC book recommendation, I do read quite a few BIPOC authors, but one book I really wanted to see in this list is The Fortune Men by Nadifa Mohammed. Now, this is actually a non-fiction book written in a fictional format, and it actually talks about Muhammad Matan, who was a real man who was wrongfully convicted of murder, and eventually whatever happens with him, don't Google it. It's like a whole spoiler that you'll get when you Google it. But the way the book is written is beautiful. It talks about a Somalian in Cardiff, England, somewhat in the 1940s, 50s, and it talks about like a less known part of history, and that's why I wanted to include this book. Also, it was also shortlisted for the Booker last year in 2021, and that's why I ended up reading it. And let me tell you, it's an important book to read. Please read. Amazing book. Chef's kiss. I'm telling you. Okay, and don't Google the book because you'll get spoilers because it's a real life event. Okay, so yeah. That being said, the next book, the next one is a bit of a long one, and that is a book about books and bookstores. And I have the perfect edition for this particular prompt because I recently read The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. Basically, this book has been longlisted for the Women's Prize 2022 as we are speaking, and it basically talks about Tuki, who is a Native American, and she is working in a bookstore. Yeah, and apparently there is a very annoying host who lives in that bookstore, and that host is just troubling her. And it's funny, but also it's very, I would say, heartwarming at the same time. And the book is not only about the ghost and the bookstore, it's about a lot of other things that we don't read generally, especially about Native American culture. So if something like this interests you, especially the Native American culture part, then this is the book that I think you will absolutely like. The next prompt is a science fiction book that you recommend. And for me, this has to be Dune by Frank Herbert. I read this last year in about November or October, somewhere around that time. And I absolutely fell in love with the first book in the series. Now, I did read the second book as well in the series, but no book in the series can match up to the first book in this series, okay? Dune is basically a brilliantly written novel about Araki, the people on the desert, and Caladan, everything. Like if you watch the movie, you know all these references. But there's something so beautiful about the book that I cannot forget the book. Like I really cannot forget the book. And by the time like I was reading the book, of course the movie was had almost released, or it had already released from what I remember. And every time I read the book, I remembered like Timothée Chalamet as Paul, and it's very, very surreal, I would say. Okay, and I'm yet to watch the movie, but Dune is one of the best science fiction books of all time on this planet Earth, and you cannot miss reading it if you are a fan of science fiction, of course, because if you're a sci-fi fan, you must have read it by now. But if you really like the movie, watch the sorry, if you really not watch, read the book as well, because it's actually that brilliant. Okay. And that being said, the next prompt is a book with a strong female protagonist. And I'm not sure if this has been mentioned earlier in any of my videos, because I don't know if I even like recommended this book last year, because I don't remember I did. But the book that I recommend is A Murder on Malabar Hill by Sujata Massey, or the book is also called The Widows of Malabar Hill by Sujata Massey. Brilliant book. Absolutely loved it. It talks about a very, very strong female character who is not allowed to practice, in a courtroom, because only men are allowed in the courtroom, because they're talking about 1920s British India, and the book is set in Bombay. It's just beautiful. I love the main character. Parveen is awesome. Okay, read the book. Amazing, brilliant, chef's kiss. And that being said, the next prompt is a fantasy read that you recommend. And for me, if you know me, if you watched all my videos till date, you know what am I going to recommend. It's going to be Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, which won the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2021, which is chef's kiss. Love this book, love the setup, love the dark academia part of it. So it's actually not only fantasy, it's like a mixture of fantasy and dark academia. Love it. Love it. That's all I will tell you. I cannot give you anything about what the book is about, because that would be just spoiling the book. You should get into this book uninitiated. Like, you should just jump into the book without looking at anything else. Okay? Yeah, I know. Yes, I know. Basically, the next prompt is a prompt that I've literally put in because I always put this in. I love reading audiobooks. I love listening to audiobooks, and it's really an important book, or a great book that I have to put in this list, and that is Daisy Jones and the Six. The audiobook of Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid is one of the best audiobooks out there. And of course, there might be a video coming up on this. Alert, yeah. Brilliant book. The reason why you should read this only on audio is because there are, like, of course, it's like 6 band members, and then there's Daisy Jones. So all of them have like their respective POVs that you need to kind of read when you're reading the book, but when you're listening to it, there are 7 different people who are narrating their dialogues, their story, and things like that. It's very interesting. I absolutely love the audiobook and the narration, and it's much more enjoyed when you have it on audio. And if you're not an audio person, I would suggest you pair it with a physical book or an ebook and then enjoy the book. Okay, but audio is a must here. Brilliant book. I recommend it. Okay, and now we are kind of down to about the last 4 prompts, and the 4th last prompt is a spooky read that you recommend. And again, I don't read much horror, but recently I read The Shining by Stephen King, which most of you must have already read. But yeah, I'm a late bloomer. I read this recently, absolutely loved it. There is such a kind of, I would say, like, it's a spooky read for sure, right? Because it's more about like a psychological thriller thing, but it's like super spooky, which I really liked about it. And I would say that if you're like a scaredy cat, and if you're someone who gets scared of things easily, don't worry, you're not going to get scared of The Shining, because it's not about ghosts. It's a psychological thriller. It's about psychology and things like that. Okay. And that being said, the last 3 prompts. The third last one is a book on productivity. Now, I was not going to include this prompt on the list because I did see this on some website on the internet, but I thought I'll add this in because first thing, of course, I have a book to recommend. But second thing, I also think that a lot of you out there read a lot of non-fiction books on productivity, and it's interesting to see like a market behind it, which I totally agree with because I work in like corporate India. But I myself do not read a lot of non-fiction productivity books. And for me, the book that I added in here, and it's a pretty short book, it's like 100 pages. It's called Attention Management by Maura Thomas. Now, Attention Management is one book that I feel is a very important book when it comes to time management, because we always are looking to manage our time. But Maura Thomas makes a point that, listen, it's not the time that you're not able to manage, it's your attention, because every time you have your phone beside you when you're working, every time you have something distracting you, you are not here for managing time, then you're here for managing your attention, which is very important. And I really like that concept a lot, and that's why I wanted to add this book in the list. So if this is something that interests you, then please do go ahead and read it. It's interesting. It gives you like tips on how to manage your attention and how to like be focused on one thing for a long period of time, because as you know, we have very little and short attention spans, which we need to really fix in this technological world. Okay, and coming to the second last prompt in this particular book, and that is a Booker nominated book that you recommend. And obviously I'm taking books from 2021, and the book which did not win the Booker but was so close to winning the Booker, and that is Anup Prakasam's A Passage North. It's a brilliant read, a great piece of literary fiction, made me want to read more about Sri Lanka and the Sri Lankan Civil War. I have no words for this book. Or there is a review video for this book down in the description box below, so I highly recommend that you check it out. But again, brilliant book, amazing book, check it out. Okay, and that being said, the last prompt of this list, the 23rd prompt of this list, is a book that you recommend from the Women's Prize nominated book. Actually, it can be a shortlisted book or non-listed book, but this is actually the winner of the Women's Prize in Fiction 2020, and that's Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. Brilliant book, highly recommended. It's again like a meditative literary / historical read. It transcends a lot of genres actually, because it talks about Shakespeare and his son Hamnet, and how Hamnet was the inspiration for Hamlet. Now, we as Indians really don't care about Shakespeare, because Shakespeare is something that's taught to you in school and you have to learn it. But the fact is that this book kind of does not give you that aspect of Shakespeare. It gives you a humanly aspect of Shakespeare and how he defined his son when it came to his plays, right? It talks about grief, it talks about loss, it talks about a lot of important aspects about Shakespeare's life, and all of them written in a fictional format that you will absolutely enjoy. So well-deserved win. So in spite of all the noises you might have heard in the background, I hope you enjoyed this video. Wishing you guys a happy World Book Day again. And if you really like this video, please consider supporting the channel, commenting, liking, subscribing, and yeah, let me know what more content you want to see in the future, and I will try to, of course, make that. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next one. Bye.